So I feel like we need to do a little rebranding. Since this is called My Brother's Deeper, which, whoever's listening, welcome back. But I shortened it to an acronym MBD.
Okay.
So welcome back to MBD. We were supposed to do this episode last week, but we had a day set and you're like, no, I have to do a funeral. And I was like, that made me start thinking about whenever you have a job and maybe you like it. And if you do, there's always like this one part of it that you just don't like. And I was wondering, it has to be the funeral for you, right?
Yeah, I think ironically, both weddings and funerals I don't like doing. And I know in some circles that probably will come across as a shock. But yeah,
The
on
wedding
one,
part.
yeah,
What's bad about the wedding?
just don't like all the stuff attached to it, and I don't like the expectations that are attached to it. I think a lot of times it becomes more about a show and a production than anything else. And also too, like honestly, like I'll just say this, like I value marriage a ton, obviously. Like I've been married coming up on 26 years this week. And so like I value it. I have a very, very high view of it. And I think sometimes because culturally it probably is not as valued as much as it used to be. I feel like people kind of rush into it and do and go into it not thinking that it's something that should last. And so like I just have a real personal sort of weight on me that if I do a wedding and it doesn't last, like there's a part of me that's just like, gosh, what did I miss? Like, could I have said something to help them avoid this, pain down the road kind of a deal? And so, like, I just don't like that pressure and that sense of it anymore. I used to love weddings. I used to count them as like such an honor, and I still do from the standpoint of people asking to be a part of that day. But I feel the weight on the other side of it so much so that I'm just like I kind of rather not do anymore. And with funerals, I think there's a bit of a similar thing where it's just not fun to do, obviously, because of what's happening. Sometimes they can be joyful. I've been part of some funerals that have actually been really, really good, where it's a true celebration of life. But similarly, there's a lot of expectations that come to it. And I honestly do I would say half the funerals that I've done are of people that I don't know. And so that makes it even more difficult of trying to figure out how do I, one, provide some comfort and some perspective, two, accurately but joyfully represent this person who I don't really know. So yeah, there's some mixed bag. So yeah, they're not fun.
So when you're marrying some couple, are you like counseling them up to the wedding?
So you
Is that why you're
yeah,
saying like, oh, it sucks when they get divorced or something?
Yeah, usually what I've done is I've kind of made that a bit of a policy to kind of go through some premarital counseling. And it's nothing like super huge or deep, but we devote quite a bit of time to that, maybe 3, 4 different times. And we just kind of talk through a bunch of different things, expectations, fears, stuff like that. And you just try to get to know the couple, try to, give them a perspective of what it will be like because it's not the fairy tale that everyone thinks it is.
And with funerals, do you have to do like grief counseling?
No, not necessarily, but what would happen is like in putting together the funeral, you're trying to get a sense of, you know, what is it that you want done? How do you want songs? If you're doing the eulogy or the message, you're going to be talking about that person, so you want a little bit of background. So you do spend a lot of time with the family leading up to it, just kind of trying to get to know the story of the person that passed away.
Well, since since last time we talked, we've had an election over here. I don't know if you've heard.
I think I saw something.
I mean, it'll probably affect you at some point,
It definitely will affect us. Yes.
But Trump got reelected, and it was kind of a surprise, I guess, for a lot of people who thought, going into it, the polls said it was pretty close.
Hmm.
And I guess it kind of is still popular wise because as votes are still being tallied, like in states like California, Trump's lead is going down. Like he didn't really win majority. He won He's at like 49 point something right now. So his lead is like 1.5%, which, when he ran against Hillary, he won the electoral college, but lost the popular vote by like 2 point something.
Mm-hmm.
So, whenever words are being bandied about like, oh, it's a mandate, it's not really like there's a lot of people out there that didn't vote for you. So, but it's still kind of insane because like first there is like the loss of it was like the shock of it, days after was like, man, this is bad. And then it just gets worse with like him, his appointments
Yeah.
and his cabinet. And then you get to a certain point, which I saw like days after, was like people just disengaging, just being like, all right, well, this is what the country voted for, and this is what you're going to get. And it's going to be a clown show.
Yeah, I think it is interesting, just the perception of everything. Like you said, when he comes out and he talks about a mandate or a landslide, and you do like you did put it in perspective in past elections, it definitely isn't, obviously, because like you said, like he didn't even get above 50%. But I think a lot of that comes from the expectation that it was going to be closer, that he was going to lose. So particularly when those swing states all started going his way and those electoral numbers started going up, I think that's where the mindset of, whoa, this is bigger than what we thought comes into play. But then when you step back and you put that into perspective, I still think it's only like the eighth largest margin in electoral college history. So it's not even, top five in regards to, huge victories or anything. So that's part of the process that I just hate. I just hate the way the narratives get spun and people latching onto it and just kind of keep going. And on one hand, I think you're right that people are starting to disengage, and I think it's interesting to try to figure out, is it disengagement, or is it people trying to like actually practice what they preach, from the standpoint that when 4 years ago when he lost and he didn't let go of it, and he still hasn't really let go of it, that on one hand now there are people going, okay, look, this is the way it is. More people voted for him. You just got to get on with it and figure out what's going to happen. I think there's a little bit of that too, which I think is a good thing because it does kind of bring things back to a bit more normalcy. But yeah, it is interesting as he's starting to go through who he wants to be in his cabinet. It does kind of feel like, it feels similar to what he did 4 years ago, where he was doing lots of non traditional picks. And you just thought, what in the world is going on here? And none of them worked out. Like every single one, he either threw under the bus or they quit eventually. And so you just wonder, what you're doing kind of the same thing as you did last time, and it
He's
does.
he's
And
doing
when it
this,
comes to Gates, like that's already backfired, you know,
and
which honestly I'm very glad of, because I'm not a big Matt Gates fan at all.
no, nobody is.
Although, did you see the post his wife did when he finally pulled out? I think it was on Twitter or X or whatever, and it was like a picture of him walking down the Capitol steps, and the caption was "the end of an era." Like, what? Do you have any self awareness whatsoever?
That's the that's sort of like the vibe of all these people on the MAGA world, is they're not self-aware at all and aren't aware of anything other than whatever that narrative is in their mind. But it's going the same way with this Hesketh guy too. Like I feel like he's about to be sunk because you know a story came out about him sexually assaulting a woman, and then now there was a story about like the New York Times released a text message his mother wrote to him about being a terrible person, and then now there's another story about how when he was the head of this sort of veterans association, he was always drunk. They had to carry him out of places. They were more sexual harassment involved with that. Like 8 people that were part of that group signed this thing and are part of the story. So it's like, okay, he's probably gone. It's going to be hard for RFK Jr. too,
I think so too.
because out of all of these people, he is probably the most nuts, like just gone mentally. The thing is, like, he keeps, like, before I felt like in his first term he did. The problem with it was he ran on this thing of like, we're going to drain the swamp, and then when he got in there, he appointed people that were part of the swamp who were somewhat able to do those types of jobs. But now he's just like putting people in who are just not going to be able to do the jobs, and they're not going to be effective. What's the point? I think, like, there's all these conspiracy theories around everything. Like, I just don't see how, like, if RFK gets, approved, like, how does he do his job? Like they're just gonna fail. They're just set up to fail, I feel like.
Well, I think their narrative, to be fair on that, is the standard of being able to do the job has been baked into the political system. So I think the idea is you bring in somebody who is outside that political system, and they're not going to do the job as it has been done because the way it has been done has not been good. So they're going to disrupt it. That's kind of the word that they use quite a bit. And I think in theory, you're like, okay, like I get that could happen, but it just seems to me that the people that are actually being picked don't actually even have an understanding of what it would mean to disrupt it in a positive way. It's more of just like, let's shut it down, let's get rid of it, and then there's nothing else to do. Like there's no actual plan. It's like and that was the thing that got me about Trump, and actually same thing with Harris, was that when you actually pushed them to go, okay, well, what is actually your plan? There wasn't a lot of substance to it. And so I feel like that's what's happening right now with these picks, is that it's like, okay, what is, if you're going to do away with the Department of Education, right? What's the plan? How are you going to actually help? Like, because the idea of just continuing to say it needs to go to the states, it needs to go to the states, like, no, like the states need help, and they're going to be asking for money. And if you're going to give them money, you have to have some sort of system by which you assess how do they get the money and where's the money go. And so there has to be some sort of infrastructure and some sort of plan. And that's the part that I'm just like, what is actually happening? What is going to actually happen if some of these people get in?
Yeah, that's why I think that nothing will happen. I'm hoping that's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, it's a fascist regime. Then they send the military after their opponents and naysayers, and they jail journalists.
That's the fear.
And the thing is like, the thing that I don't think they get is, like, if you're the head of a fascist regime, it don't work out well for you in the end, buddy.
See,
Mussolini got strung up from a telephone wire.
he did.
Hitler ate a bullet. And go down the line, there's 10 or 11 more fascist regimes where the guy who's on top, it ends in violence.
Yeah. I think the challenge, though, to be fair, is that, and I'm not saying this is not an opinion. Like this is, things that he himself has said. Trump looks at people like Putin, and he looks at people like Kim Jong Un in North Korea, and he actually has a respect for how they operate, and they operate almost more. They're not so much fascists as they are dictators more than anything.
Yeah,
And
authoritarian.
I think he looks at them to go, no, I can do that too. It's possible. So you're right. Like, I don't think that history element would in any sort of way register with their thinking at all. And so I think that's been the nature of Trump's political career, is he thinks he's a unicorn. He thinks he's unique and different, and there's no one else like him. And that's where I think history will actually, on one hand, prove him right because he is unique and interesting. But on another hand, when it actually judges his successes, I personally think they'll be few and far between.
Yeah, I just hope that these people are ineffective as they seem, and they can't get anything done, or they, shoot themselves in the foot. Like this new department that they put together, Doge, with Elon Musk and Revensky. But their boss is Marjorie Taylor Greene, and
Yeah.
like she is about as ineffective as anyone.
She's
And
scary.
yeah, but like they're gonna do away with the IRS. They're gonna sort of like gut the federal branch. I just don't see how that goes because like I feel like if you take away stuff from the military, that is like walking this line of Cooville.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because like
Yeah.
there's gonna be some military people that aren't gonna stand for it. You know?
Well, and actually, I think that's the other bit that I'm not sure. I'm not sure Trump always sees is that how things are connected. Because just on a real sort of like, I think a basic level, when you begin to hurt the military, that actually goes off brand for the Republicans.
Yeah.
And that's going to come back to bite him if he does that, because that's where actually I think some Republicans will have a bit of a backbone, because you can never go wrong supporting the military, And so that's where that pushback, I think, would come, hopefully. And I do think it would. And that's where hopefully some of that balancing occurs to where, like you said, like things like the radical changes actually don't happen.
Like this guy, the
Yeah.
immigration czar,
Yeah.
this guy's come out and talking like a big bully, like threatening to jail a U.S. mayor. Like, come on, dude. How would you do that? Like, what's the logistics of that, dude? Like, you're really just gonna go in and just arrest a mayor of Denver? But I think that's all. I think that's all rhetoric. I mean, I think he's just trying to scare people. And,
Me
he
too.
came, and this guy came up with the whole thing of separating families because as a deterrent, like if they know they're going to be separated, they won't come into the country. And like, the whole immigration thing to me is a nothing burger because if you look at Bush and Obama, they were at their height, they were deporting 400,000 people a year, and that's far more than Trump ever did when he was in office. So like the thing, I think what the difference is like Bush and Obama did it and they didn't talk about it. They didn't come out and say, hey, we're going to use the military to do this. They just did it and didn't say anything about it. And there's just this rhetoric around it that makes it seem like it's insane. But really, you know, it's just something that countries do. Like we couldn't come to England and be like, we're just going to sit here and like nothing happened. England's going to be like, no, dude, there's some steps here.
Yeah.
Every country kind of has them.
I think that's part of the issue. Honestly, that so many countries across Europe even are dealing with right now is that there's a huge global movement towards this nationalist, kind of perspective. Like it's here in the UK for sure. France is going through it right now. Italy's going through it. Like there's a ton of countries that are kind of going through that right now. And you have your process. The issue for people is when people don't go through the right channels and go through the right process. What do you do when they're here? Right. So that's part of the issue here in the UK is you have a lot of people coming over here and they're claiming asylum or whatever other reason that they're coming over here, and they haven't gone through the right procedures. So what they do is they put them up, they pay for them, they're basically funding them whilst they go through whatever process they need to go through. And that's, I think, where people here, but also the people in America are frustrated going, okay, well, what is that doing for our tax dollars? Is that money that's left over? Da da da. So one of the things that I was interested in, because I was similar to you, trying to figure out, okay, what are the actual numbers as compared to different presidencies and stuff. And one of the things that Biden did even before the election, was that, I'm gonna see if I can get this right. So when illegals were crossing over the Mexican border and coming into Texas or Arizona or whatever, what would happen is that they would, if they got caught, they would then be put into some sort of like detention center, right? Some place to stay. Those that were claiming asylum, there was like this whole process to kind of go through, and it took longer. So they were in the detention center longer. So part of the pushback was, why are we funding people who've entered into the country illegally? So what Biden did is he actually removed some of the red tape not so that people could actually stay in the country, but so they could be processed quicker, right? So whatever the determination was, you can stay or you could leave, set that aside, but you get to that point quicker, which in many ways that helped the taxpayer because then they're not in the detention center for as long. So Trump has come out and this czar has come out and they've said, because they've spun it, oh, see, all Biden's trying to do is get more people in. He's just trying to let our borders be, porous and anybody can come in. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to say, once you're caught, you got to go back to Mexico and then we'll process your asylum claim. And so on the surface, that sounds like, oh, that sounds more efficient. That costs the taxpayer less, so on and so forth. But actually what is going to happen once they do this is that they're going to send them back, which is at our cost because we literally are going to drive them back, I'm assuming. They sit wherever they're going to be and wait. But then once their asylum claim comes in and they need to be processed, we have to go drive to them, pick them up, and then bring them back and then house them while all that's happening. So it's actually going to cost the taxpayer more. So it's those are the sort of things that drive me crazy because it's like, well, hang on. If you just look at kind of the top level sort of narrative of what people are saying, the detail actually gets lost. And that's what's frustrating to me with the political sort of speak. And whether you like him or you don't, Trump is a political speaking person. He has demonstrated over and over that he doesn't have a firm grasp of details. And so when he speaks and when he talks about these things, they make great headlines and they make great bumper stickers, but they actually don't communicate anything. And that's what's frustrating.
Just like yesterday when he said that, he makes this threat to Hamas about returning the October 7th hostages. And he's like, if you don't do this by the time that I'm in office, there will be hell to pay. What does that mean? Like, of course, Israel's, president's like, thank you, Trump. Thank you for saying that. Because, yeah, they want that to happen too. But, like, are you threatening military intervention by the U.S.? And, like, okay, I'm sure Israel will want the help, but, like, it's kind of almost over,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's similar to.
But what are the logistics of that, dude?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's similar to his claim about Russia, Ukraine as well. Like, hey, 24 hours, I'll have it settled. What? And then when people were questioning him during the election, well, I'm not going to say that right now. Okay, so you apparently have just the perfect diplomatic solution to all this, but because it doesn't benefit you right now, you're going to allow a war to continue to happen, knowing he doesn't have a diplomatic solution at all. His solution is to convince Zelensky to give in so that Russia could have more land. That's his solution. How do I pressure Zelensky to give in?
Yeah, well, I think it's more, there's a lot going on there, and I think Musk has a lot to do with that part of it, the Russian part, and Ukraine, because he's been mixed up with that, with Starlink. And, don't get me started on Starlink, because I'll go down some conspiracy theories. But I do think that is an aspect, too, that is going to blow up and not go well between Trump and Musk, because I think you're starting to see a little bit of it. There are stories coming out about like him getting into it with Trump's lawyer, who's sort of running the cabinet and like picking the picks for his cabinet and all that. But anyway, I think that the scary part of it too is Musk, because he is completely radicalized. He basically, I don't know, like if you paid attention to him, but before years before the election, he had a son who transitioned into a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do know about that.
And he has said that, that son is dead to him and was taken by the woke mind virus. So there's this, narrative that wokeism is a mind virus. And I think, what's even more interesting on the other end of that, I feel like MAGA is a mind virus, and that Musk has the MAGA mind virus, and like he's unaware of it. It's just like these polar opposites. And I'm not saying that wokeism is a mind virus, but I think that whenever you get radicalized like that and you have that much money, like you're basically the king of the world. I don't know what he does if like things start to go south with Trump, because I don't like this thing this Doge thing. I don't see it being effective.
No, I think it could be the opposite, honestly, because when you're trying to, um, anytime you talk about government efficiency, essentially what you're talking about is eliminating jobs, right? You're trying to eliminate the bureaucracy, which, again, on the surface, seems like a great thing. You can't even say inexperience at this point anymore because he's had 4 years as a president, but it's part of the lack of understanding of how a government actually works is that you do actually need a civil service. You do need career diplomats. You need people to provide consistency, regardless of who's in the office, in regards to um, domestic and foreign policy. But what has happened is that they've radicalized that to say you're either for us or you're against us. And so even if you have an opinion that differs, but could still be valid, if it's different from them, then that means you're against us. Therefore, you're radicalized. Therefore, you're part of the deep state, all that sort of stuff. And I think that's why it'll eventually be inefficient, is because actually you're going to eliminate people who help the country move forward on a daily basis.
Well, he came out a couple of days ago and said that he wanted to get rid of that. Well, he asked the question on X, like, should we get rid of the IRS? Which, I mean, on the surface, I think everyone's like, yeah, get rid of the taxes. But also, like, Bernie Sanders has come out and said that he kind of agrees with, like, gutting the Pentagon, which is something Doge wants to do as well. And like, that's hard to argue with, too, about military spending,
No, it is. But I think that's where, again, the lack of understanding of how all that connects is going to come into play. And so I don't think they've seen far enough ahead to go, well, wait a minute, if you start cutting military personnel, you're going to really, really start upsetting a lot of Republicans. And I just don't see that as being sustainable. I really don't.
I think that is scary and might be an option for them to sidestep all of this, though, is for Trump is like he's doing this thing where they're not signing these agreements where there's like an oath basically, and he's not doing it. No one in his cabinet is doing it, but they can't see into these departments until they sign into these things. And like, so something similar happened in 2000 when Bush beat Gore and there was the recount in Florida. It slowed down the process to where Bush didn't sign. No one could sign in because no one was president yet. So no one could see into the departments. And the 9/11 Commission in 2004 said that was a big part of what enabling 9/11 was that they didn't know what was going. When Bush finally got into office, they had missed so much. So much had gone by in the intelligence apparatus that led to part of 9/11 happening. So, like, if you can't see into these things, can something like that happen again?
Absolutely. In fact,
Yeah.
I would argue that potentially there are foreign states that are banking on this and who actually foresaw this. Now, this is really getting into a conspiracy theory, but foreign states who actually foresaw this and through social media and whatever helped influence the election so that this candidate could be the president elect and then begin putting plans into place. I do believe that could happen for sure. Will it? I don't know, but I definitely believe it fosters a lot of fertile soil for that.
I mean, there's so much talk about Russia, and like you can see where that benefits them because they, we were talking about them wanting, the Ukraine thing and just wanting more land, but they want to break up NATO, and Trump's threatened to leave NATO, and he's threatened other NATO members for not paying their dues and all that. And I do think that I had this wild thought, dude, the other day because I was watching this movie called The Package with Gene Hackman and Tommy Lee Jones, and is directed by the guy that directed The Fugitive. basically it's like this Cold War thing. The end of it basically is Gene Hackman saving, like, Tommy Lee Jones is like the sniper, and he's going to kill the Russian president. Because there's like this big like meeting, like it's this build up right before, because it's shot in 89, 88, 89, and there's this build up to like the Berlin Wall coming down, like there in the movie, there's like this meeting between America and the Russians and foreign leaders, and they're gonna like talk about like bringing down the wall and all that, and they're meeting in Chicago. So Tommy Lee Jones is going to take out there's this rogue, he's part of this rogue American military operation that doesn't want the wall to come down, and they're going to shoot the Russian president. But Gene Hackman saves the day, right? And I was thinking to myself, like, people in America, MAGA in particular, don't really seem to give a shit about whether Russia, they don't view them as an enemy. They don't view them as like something like when all this stuff came up where, in 2016 election, that there was some Russian interference. And like, and if you do any kind of research, Russia's been interfering for years, even before that.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable that it hasn't come up in this election at all, that they interfered, because maybe that's just how good they've gotten, that you don't even know that they're doing it. But I had this wild idea. I was like, why is it that most Americans who probably voted for Trump don't think that Russia is an issue? And I thought, maybe it's because they're white. Maybe it's because that they're just white people, and they feel like if Russia were to invade like Red Dawn, that white people would be okay.
Well, but okay, the problem with that, I think, is how do you account for the 80s then and the 90s when Russia was a huge fear? And Rocky IV is coming out. Like, people did not like Russians at all. It had nothing to do with race. It had everything to do with the fact that we were in a nuclear race with them, and they were communists, we were Democrat. That's evil versus good. I don't think it's a race thing. I think what it is I think Trump's relationship with Putin has warmed people up to Russia. I think people believe, well, if he thinks he's okay, then he's probably okay, not fully understanding what Putin has done and what he is doing. And I think because Russia has not been as much of a world player as they used to be, at least in the media, I do think they're a world player behind the scenes. I think it's just kind of been something that's been glossed over people. And I think Trump has played a huge part in that personally.
I know he has. I mean, but I do think that there's something going back to remember the 80s. I think that history is not an American strong suit. From what I know of, like, talking to people who probably aren't that well read. If you look at like how I saw a study yesterday, like 47% of Americans read at a 6th grade level.
40%?
47. So what we're saying here is, like, you're getting into these conversations online with these people who probably can't comprehend what you're telling them.
And I think that's true. Yeah.
And they would definitely not know their history or want to know their history. So like the big strides in this election for Trump was Gen Z. Young white boys voted for him.
Yeah.
Even young white women, but they don't know the history. They don't, and they don't care to know the history. I do this other podcast. I'm going to put this guy on Front Street right now.
Okay, here we go.
But I do this other podcast called Once Upon a Time in Texas with this kid that I grew up with, went to high school with. And we haven't talked about this on this podcast because it's just this slog of getting through his life, which is interesting. But the impetus for me getting into this podcast was sort of what happened to this guy that I knew who was a very good friend of mine, and then everyone seemed to turn against him. I wanted to investigate that. But it became a hard sell to him because he was very suspicious of, like, what are you trying to do with this?
He was suspicious of you.
I came to him saying, like, I want to sort of investigate this whole thing about, you borrowed this money and never paid it back. Are you a charlatan? or is it a simple mistake? What's your side of it, right?
And just real quick, you guys haven't gotten to that yet, have you? In the
Not even
story? Yeah,
close. We're
that's what I
not
was
even
thinking.
close.
Yeah, yeah.
But I have talked to him about like things off air. Can't that we didn't record it. And one of the things was right before the election, he told me he was going to vote for Trump because his grocery bill is too high, which has become this common, like, one issue refrain for Magaland is that, their eggs are too high, cost too much. But really, knowing his background and knowing why, there was a period where we didn't talk for like 5 or 6 years. It was because we got into this big argument over racism.
Really?
Yeah. So we had this friend in high school who was a black man, and he stayed friends with him over the years. This conversation happened in L.A. Around 2017 and or 16. It was like leading up to the first Trump election. 2016. And he was saying that he was talking to this black guy. This black guy had a nephew that was 5 or 6 years old, 7 maybe. And the nephew asked his uncle about slavery in the US. And this uncle started explaining it to him. And so he's relating this story to my friend. The black man is relating the story to his friend. He's telling the story about his nephew asking about American slavery. And my friend stops him and says, "Why are you telling him if he doesn't know about it? Like, isn't that he goes, isn't that where we want to be? Is where people have forgotten it?"
Whoa.
And I was like, "Bro, do you understand the oblivious racism in that?" And he didn't. And we got into this huge fight. And we didn't speak for like 5 years.
Really?
Yeah. So I know where this guy comes from. I know why he voted for Trump. He won't. I don't think he's aware of it. To be aware, but I think that like he is the perfect encapsulation of why people vote the way they vote.
Yeah, I know, and I think that's where it gets difficult, Josh, because I think you're absolutely right. Like I don't have any qualms with what you're saying at all. I think the difficulty is that like it's just not always clear, because like one of the things that was really disappointing to me, or at least, well, it was disappointing, but it was also like surprising to me, was that having a woman run for president, which again I think that's great. I think that's awesome, and in many ways I didn't even think about it. Like it really wasn't that big of an issue to even think about, to go, "Oh, she's only the second woman." It was a bigger deal. Her race was actually kind of more of a kind of glass ceiling than anything of what she was running for. But I was really surprised that when you look at numbers, that less women voted for her than voted for Biden. So when you when you start looking at that sort of thing, you go, okay, it's not, it's just a complicated, there's lots of levels to it. I think you're right that there is a lot of misogyny and there is a lot of racism that's baked into the MAGA movement. I don't think that's why everybody does it, but I do think it's baked into it. But on the flip side, it's also not the people fighting against it that's encouraging them to vote either. I think at the end of the day, I think what happened is people listen to a soundbite or a particular argument that resonates with them, and that's it. And so in many ways, I think people become single issue voters. And if your issue is my grocery bill, yeah, you're right. It is higher than 4 years ago. That's Biden's fault because that's what Trump's saying. You're done. There's no more research. There's no more questions. Like you just accept it and you move forward. Or if you're on the other side and you go, yeah, they're gonna not allow abortions to happen, and so that's the reason why I'm going to vote against him. And for Kamala, it's a single issue voter that I think is our problem. As I don't think there are people who are actually weighing all of the options and all of the issues and going, there is no perfect candidate. Because you can't say that either in a single issue voting mentality, because to be for one means you have to be against the other. And so there is no weighing going, there's two imperfect candidates. To me, based on what my beliefs, values, and convictions are, do the old pros and cons list. Who has the more pros versus the cons? And that's where I'm going to go. I don't think people do that. And I think that's the issue with the country, is that you just don't have an educated citizenship.
Well,
And
if you
that's the
look,
issue. And I think that our politicians have figured that out and they play to it. And again, I don't think that's just America. I think that happens in a lot of other countries as well. I think it happened here in the UK when it came to Brexit. I think the way that they positioned the issue. I mean, the vote happened before we moved here, but seeing the consequences of it, like, and talking to people, people were not educated or informed in regards to what's going to happen if we vote for this. And I think it's the same thing in.
yeah, it goes back to the sixth grade reading level, because if you told someone, like, because they all believe inflation started under Biden, but actually it started in 2018-19 and then ramped up with COVID, and that was under Trump's watch. But you would have to go and research that and do some reading. People aren't reading like that. And I know that the person that I mentioned, he doesn't read. The thing, he sends me stuff on Instagram all the time, and they're just videos. And I
Yeah,
think that's how people communicate these
it
days
is.
and get their information, is by pictures and videos. Like, we've regressed to, like cave paintings, like we're just like back to this thing of just like, give me that, pointing at a picture. Like, I used to work, we were talking about at the beginning of this, of like the hardest part of jobs, and I worked in the service industry for a long time. And the hardest part for me was dealing with people in the service industry, which is all it is. That's all it is.
That's a, that's a hard thing to overcome.
Can't stand people, but they're in your face all the time. But the thing that I noticed around 2018 is that people walk into a place and you hand them a menu, and they put the menu aside, get their phone out, Google the place or Yelp the place, and look at the pictures of the food. And that's how they
Really?
order.
Wow.
They don't read. I don't think they can, honestly, I don't. I think sixth grade level is an average, and it's worse with some people. And they just can't read and comprehend. So how are they going to know anything about what happened before?
Yeah. No, I
You
agree with
know?
you. I think it's sad. I mean, so when you and your friend talked about this off, air, not recording, and he kind of talked about why he's going to do what he's going to do and how he's going to vote. Like, how did you guys have a back and forth with that, or did you just kind of let that go and think I'm going to bring that up later, or what?
Yeah, it kind of bounced around, and it was a little hectic because I wanted to understand him. And like, I didn't get into the whole inflation thing with him because it kind of bounced to wokeism, you know, and about how like the left kind of are taking things too far. And I kind of agreed with him. I was like, look, it's hard for people of Generation X people to keep up with it, to keep up with the pronouns and to keep up. Like, I understand that. Like, I don't care. It doesn't bother me that people want to be called something. I'll call them whatever they want to be called. But I do get it that it is harder for older generations to kind of keep up with it and like, and feel like, maybe it is going too far. I don't know. But like, I was trying to sympathize with them, or empathize with them, but it was a very short thing at the end of when we were talking, and I never spoke to him again. And I know he voted for Trump because he posted something on his Instagram about voting for Trump, uh, and it was, the only reason he gave me was because he thought, under Biden he really struggled. He said that he had made a certain amount this year and was still struggling, and he said that when Trump's first term he was doing better financially. And I thought, he hasn't thought about this at all because he had a different job back then and he was making, this is what got him in trouble. We haven't gotten to this point. But there's no like connecting dots, which is insane because it's almost like speaking to someone that's just floating out in outer space. They're
Well,
not tethered to anything.
well, and I think that lines up with what you're talking about in the restaurant. People wanting wanting their information to be accessible quickly, graphically, and in short amounts. And so if that's kind of the person that's being built in our society today, they're not going to want to connect the dots because they don't have the attention span to do it. They're just not interested in that because they're bored. And it's like, move on, just summarize it for me. And the reality is that when you talk about things like politics and you talk about things like culture, religion, all these kind of big things that you're never supposed to talk about with people, they're not sound bites. Like, they're long, in-depth, complicated, multi-leveled sort of conversations that are nuanced and require a lot of give and take. And we've just lost that, I think, especially in politics, we've lost that. But even broader wise, I think culture, we've lost that as well, or we're in the process of losing it.
What's strange is there was this thing right after the election. People were breaking down like how people voted, and across the board in some of these states, people, there were all of these Democratic governors that won races, and then Trump would win that state. Like one of them is like North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
They elected a Democratic governor, but it went red for Trump, and people were like, "No way, man, no way, Starlink has something to do with this." Like, it did feel like, in a weird way, though, it felt a couple of days after the election like there was like some sort of mind wipe. It just didn't. It like things felt like off. Like you had like travel, like somehow Musk invented time travel and went back in time and did something, and you're like, there's something off with this brick in the wall. It never looked like that.
Doesn't make sense.
But the thing is, AOC was on Twitter, I guess, before she got off, but a lot of people left Twitter, dialed out, but she did this thing with her followers. She was like, "Look, I want to listen. I want to hear from you guys. I want to know people who voted for me and voted for Trump."
Yeah.
And all these people, answered, and they were like, "Yeah, I voted for you, and I voted for Trump." And there were all these different reasons, and reasons like, I feel like Democrats are better at local governing, and Republicans are better at the macro. And one of them was like, and this is the one that I think is really the truest, is like, they said, you're a real person. Like, I can relate to you. Like, you come off real. Like, Trump comes off real. Like, we can relate to that. They couldn't relate to Harris. There's a lot of like, she's fake. She's not a real person. And I feel like that is what people are voting on mostly, is like, who can they relate to? Like, who feels like the realest person to them,
Yep. I mean, here's the crazy thing though, Josh, is that I think that's been the case forever.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm exaggerating, but like, the famous one was it 1960 election when Kennedy was going against Nixon, and it was the first debate that was televised. And when you look back at the polls, Nixon was winning when everything was based on what they heard on the radio. And then as soon as they saw Kennedy live, and they saw not only the way he looked, but just his poise and the way he answered the questions. And apparently, Nixon looked uncomfortable, was sweating, like just did not look like a president. The polls completely changed. And so it was that thing of like, oh, I can relate to that guy because he seems like he's in charge. He seems like he, can do some very, very difficult things without, breaking down or whatever. And Nixon didn't look that way. So I think you're right. I think people need to understand that that's always a factor. I think the problem is that then we began to use that as a way to manipulate people. So if you can look relatable, then that's what actually matters. And that's one of the things that just is really, really hard for me to grasp in regards to Trump, is that you're spot on in that a lot of people relate to him. And it's so ironic that people who, are in the flyover states of West Virginia, Nebraska, all those sorts of areas, that they feel more related, that they can relate more to a multi-millionaire who probably doesn't even wipe his own bum. You know what I mean? Like, let's just be honest here. Like he's probably not ever actually worked an honest day in his life. Okay. And I'm not trying to diminish what he's accomplished, but like that's a whole nother podcast to talk about. But that they feel more that he's more relatable as a millionaire billionaire simply because he speaks his mind. Like that essentially, like the person who's in, Appalachia relates more to Trump because he speaks his mind, he bucks the system, he's a bit of a rebel, when everything else about the guy is completely unrelatable to them. Completely. And so to me, that's the lesson to be learned is like how are you actually communicating to people? Because that's how you relate to them. And that's where I think that's why Harris was such a horrible candidate. It's one of the reasons why she was such a horrible candidate. It's because she wasn't relatable. Like maybe in real life she is, I don't know, but like in front of the camera just wasn't good, like she just didn't have it. And so I think people saw that, and I don't think it inspired confidence. I think that was the big deal, in Pennsylvania, because I remember thinking, I read something where, some of the analysis was obviously Pennsylvania is going to be one of the huge swing states, but Biden had taken that 4 years ago. And that the reason why he had taken it was because he was relatable for two reasons. He was relatable to a mostly Republican state because he came from a blue collar background and he was Catholic, right? And he was from the East Coast. So there's three.
He's from, Delaware's close.
From Delaware. Yeah, exactly. So you've got now another candidate who, I mean, I guess she can't, yeah, I guess a blue collar background from the standpoint that like she grew up like in a broken home and, a single mom and stuff like that. But that's very different than somebody whose dad was like working in a coal mine. Even though economically that might be similar, I think in people's mind that seems very different. And then the fact that she's from California, that's a whole nother thing, a bias and all that sort of stuff. So it's no surprise, honestly, that she had such an uphill climb in those sort of swing states. But you're right; it all comes down to relatability.
And I also think that, I think that's all it's about because, like, I don't think the issues mean anything. And I especially don't think that, like, if your life is made better by an administration, that helps either because, like, Biden opened up all of these plants in Ohio, in red states, in like swing states, and like gave jobs to these people or created jobs for people, and like that didn't sway anyone.
No. Well,
You
and that
know?
was the other thing with the whole like economy situation was that the inflation became the story rather than the job market. Like the jobs reports, was great for Biden. He was creating more jobs. Like unemployment was going down. Like all these sorts of things were really, really good. But that wasn't the soundbite. The soundbite was inflation. So yeah, I think you're right. I think he didn't get enough credit for that. They didn't do a good enough job on their side of trying to change the narrative either.
Yeah. But speaking of like one issue, like voting, should we talk about like our personal dilemma? Because we're touched by this personally.
What's our personal dilemma?
Well, we both know someone who voted, like someone we're related to. Should we talk about it or no?
If you want to, I mean, there might be a lot more people we don't know that voted that way too. But you just talk
No,
about
but
mom.
no one's closer than that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, yeah. Sure, you can. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that? I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to talk about it in such a way that makes her look bad. As far as like when we get into the reasons why crowd and she's not doing the research. She's listening to the sound, but like all that sort of stuff. I don't want her to come across badly.
I don't either because like I've had some time to think about it because a lot of the things that have happened, one of the big things that happened right after the election and even up till now, like Thanksgiving, because there's a big talk about like spending the holidays with like people who voted for Trump in your family. You know, people were saying. I don't know if this is true, because for me it was harder than what the decisions that these people made, that were saying that they were cutting Trump family out of their lives. They were like not talking to them, uninviting them to holiday dinners, and it seemed like a real thing that was happening, because like some of the people who, there were videos of people who had voted for Trump, or were MAGA people, who were like expressing sadness. Some were crying, saying that their family had cut them off and like no, doesn't want to have anything to do with them. And I was thinking, like when I found out, and I was like, I can't do that. I have a 2-year-old kid, and
That's
like
ridiculous.
she's like my partner won't allow it to happen, for one. And like it's just not that simple, to do it. And it's also counterproductive in trying to understand each other, you know?
It is. And I think it also gives in to the very thing we've been talking about, of just how complicated it is. It's like there are people that I absolutely love and absolutely respect who do count themselves as Trump supporters. And I disagree with them vehemently. I'm not going to cut them out of my life, though. Okay. Because there are things that about my life that other people would disagree with vehemently. And I don't want them to cut me out of their life just because we view things a bit differently. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's part of trying to build, like you said, understanding is like trying to really come from a place of like, okay, walk me through just kind of your back and forth and your struggles and your like thought process. The difficulty is, and I think this is possibly where mom would fall into this category, is that I don't know how deeply of a process she went through in making that decision. And that's where the frustration could come.
I'm not even convinced that she voted.
Well, I'm not either, honestly.
I mean, she said she did, and she said she made a point of saying like the first time in 20 years, but she told you something different.
She did. Yeah, she totally did.
So it may be just a line that she's saying because everyone else voted that way. But like the only thing that she has been sort of harping on is abortion. That she's like, 100% against
Yeah.
that.
And that's where the single issue mindset comes. That
But I think we've had this conversation before, and you agreed that it was like there were a lot of people who don't like worry about, they are pro life, but they like once the baby's born.
I think there are. I do think that the majority. I keep saying that. I don't know. I don't know what the numbers are. I think there's a ton of people who, you're right, are pro life, and they only think about that in terms of the unborn, right? But to be truly pro life, then you need to be pro life for the entire life. So the same people who are pro life on an abortion issue tend to also be, again, I'm generalizing, but also tend to be like capital punishment proponents. Well, that's an inconsistency. It seems to be on several levels, and so yeah, I do think that people are inconsistent in that. But it's not to say that I mean, I would consider myself pro-life as well, but I wouldn't. If we had never adopted, I don't think that disqualifies me from being pro-life or being a proponent, or to say I'm not doing anything directly to help, because there are lots of different ways in order to advocate for that position without having to physically adopt a child.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you have to adopt every unwanted kid, but I do think that if you're gonna make a woman who's been raped at 13 years old
Mm-hmm.
have that child, you know, what is the process of like taking care of that kid?
Agreed.
Are you involved in a way where you're donating money, or you're part of a volunteer group or whatever? But I honestly don't think people are thinking that far down the line, dude.
I think you're right. I think most people aren't, and I think that's part of the issue, is that people actually aren't thinking about the ramifications of their positions. It is it's a short, pithy slogan, and that's what they get behind. And so they don't understand the work that goes into going, well, hang on, here's where this policy has legs and what actually needs to happen. So, I mean, that's the ironic thing, right, Josh, about if you're pro-life, which means there's going to be more kids in possibly single parent homes who are under the poverty line. Those are the people who actually need a ton of the government assistance and help and the social programs that most Republicans want to cut because they feel like those people are freeloading. So there's not that connection between a social network that actually needs to happen for people who are in those positions that you've created by having this pro-life position. I completely agree with you. I don't think people make that connection at all.
You know what? Another thing that happened here was in Chicago was that less people voted this time around. Like Biden got a certain amount of votes in 2020, and this time around Harris got almost 200,000 votes less in Chicago than Biden got. And at the same time, Trump got around 20% of the vote, whereas in the previous election, he got like 13. And I have another friend that lives in Texas that doesn't vote. He just thinks he thinks both sides are trash, right? And I think that a lot of people feel that way about, like, we don't have a third party, a viable third party. If we do, it's Jill Stein. If you talk to certain people, they think she's a Russian operative. I don't know how true that is. There's a picture of her sitting at a table, and Putin and some other
Right.
Russian dude is there.
Right.
But she got more of the vote this time around too, in certain spots, like in Michigan and like the county that Detroit's in. Like, I think she got 20% of the vote, and it's like, okay, well, what is the way forward? Because I do think when we were talking about these issues of especially like abortion and capital punishment, the two voting parties that we have are all twisted up. They're designed to go against each other. So one party is pro-life, one party is pro-death, but they're flipped on issues like, like capital punishment. The Republicans are for that, but they're pro-life for babies. Democrats are for saving lives through capital punishment and killing babies. None of that makes sense. None of that makes sense.
I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. Like and then also when you talk about, the idea of just economics as well. Like there's so many things that go against that. Like I mentioned before, like Republicans want to reduce the tax burden. Republicans want to cut programs, which ultimately doesn't make sense if you're trying to help raise an overall, poverty level and that sort of thing. To be able to think it's just job creation that's going to do everything, that actually doesn't make sense, But then on the other side too, where you've got the Democrats who are looking at the answer is all regulation, all taxes, all that sort of stuff. It's like, well, hang on. No, like you do need to give corporations and businesses some leeway in order to reinvest, ideally, profits and stuff into infrastructure, into salaries and that sort of stuff. So I do think it does get mixed up, and that's why I don't know how you could actually say, from my personal position, how you could say I'm 100% Republican and 100% or 100% Democrat. Because from my perspective, I think there are strengths on both sides, and that's where where like a true sort of in the middle.
Is there a way forward where there are more options? Like we have this independent party, and that never has taken off. Like there's no sort of in between that is helpful for our political system, and it feels like that's what we need. Like, because it seems like most people are in the middle of what they want. They're not too far right, and they don't want to be too far left, because people on the left are wackos, and people on the right are just like maybe de-evolved. Who knows?
No, I agree with you. I mean, it's interesting because, here in the UK, you definitely have a multi-party system, even though, the majority of those who are in parliament come from two parties, which are essentially a right side party and a left side party. I don't know, man. I think the issue, unfortunately, comes down to money. I think in order to truly create a strong third party, you have to have a ton of people who are willing to fund it. I mean, that's the reason why the two-party system is so strong, is because there's just so much stinking money involved in it. And you've got to have that same thing, unfortunately, to pull a third party with any sort of chance. You just got to have a lot of money behind it because of the way the game is played now. The game is played in the media, and you've got to be able to compete with that with a budget. So I
Yeah,
think you need some people. I think you need some really big people who have been, huge Republican supporters, and some really big rich people who have been Democrat supporters to come together and go, enough's enough. Why don't we do something together? You know?
yeah. I also feel like that will never happen because we like to have enemies, and
Yes.
like we need to have this argument all the
Yes.
time because that's like one thing that another thing that happened, on the social media platforms after the election was like what I said before about the disengagement from Democrats. They just said, "We're done. We're not talking to you anymore." And like all the MAGA people were mad. They're like, "Where are you going?" They needed the argument. They
Yeah.
needed to like say, "Ha ha, we owned you," and like there was no one there listening to them. And I think that's what Magaland needs is someone to kind of lord over and like brag over and call snowflakes and all this stuff. And I propose that,
I think both sides, by the way, I think both sides need that.
yeah.
Like both
And
sides need
yeah, you have
somebody
to
to pick
feel
on.
you want to feel better about yourself. It's like America is like watching, that intervention show. Did you ever watch that intervention where this bad people people have bad drug problems, their family comes in, the guys they find out and they climb out the window. But that's what America is. It's like you're looking at this and you're like, "Oh, that's not my life. At
Yeah.
least I'm not that bad. At
Yeah.
least I'm not, I might have some issues, but I'm not that bad." And I think that America is like just a car wreck on the
Yeah.
freeway.
Yeah.
But I want to I think that America should change its name. I'm going to start referring to it as Magaland. The it's like the Congo. It's like
How
the
can you do that
Congo.
though? How can you
It's
do
like,
that? There's no
well,
mandate.
I just have to like take control of the country with the military because Mobutu did it with the Congo and he changed it to Zaire. They were like Zaire for like 30 years.
Yeah, it's true.
So I think it's doable
Yeah. But
because I think that's what
that
I
didn't
mean.
last though.
No, I mean it doesn't. I'm telling you, these things like these these dictatorships don't. And who knows if it'll be that bad? I mean, I think most Americans think that that stuff doesn't happen here or in America, but
Yep.
like I think that you think that we can just right the ship every 2 to 4 years, but like I don't know, man. Like there's got to be a point where you see most countries kind of go through a thing like this at some point in their history.
Hmm. No, I agree with you.
It's gonna be bad though. If it is gonna happen, it's gonna be really dark, some dark years. Like especially if like departments get slashed, and like people don't have resources to do things like if you have a child that has autism or special learning setbacks, like what the Department of Education is not going to be there for you.
I know.
Like there aren't going to be certain resources that you can use. There's a lot of people like after the election, they were like, wait a minute. So like, we're going to be able to keep Biden care, right? No,
Right.
the Medicare is going to go too. And like people were freaking out,
Hmm.
who voted for Trump.
Hmm.
They didn't realize that like these were the things they were talking about in Project 2025, you know? And it's like, you know, also like, if they do the tariff thing, like, if you do any reading on that, there is some like reasoning behind it, but it's not, it's basically tariffs hold consumers hostage.
Well, your friend who voted for Trump, who lives in Texas, is going to feel that more than anybody.
I know.
Because if a 25% tariff on Mexico goes into effect, Texas is the first place that it's going to hit hard.
I know. But I don't think he knew, like all this, leading up, tariffs were an issue. And like he was saying that before the election. And like, I don't think he knows what it works.
No, he doesn't. No,
I mean, I
no.
think Trump knows how it works. And I think Trump is just using it as like a threat. But I don't think people really paid attention to the tariff thing, or they thought that tariff is a tax. The other countries have to pay the tax.
Yeah. I mean, you may be right that he doesn't know or that he does know how it works. I'm not sure because people have asked him directly during the election that question. And his answer was it's a tax on the other country. So I don't know if he's just saying that from a political perspective. I honestly don't know. But for sure, people in America who voted for him particularly don't understand how that works. And that's going to be a rude awakening if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, like you saw, right? I don't know if you saw this, but a lot of companies were getting ready for it and like
Yeah.
laying off people
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So this grocery bill is not going to go down.
There's no question it won't. I mean, that was one of the things that, people, I'd heard people were talking about from an economy standpoint is that Trump actually may have helped the economy short term when he started talking about tariffs on China and such. Because a lot of big companies and corporations who get stuff made in China started putting in big orders so they could get those orders done before that tariff went into effect in order to have it. And so that's a bit of a bubble that was created, but that will eventually burst as well.
Well, there's a lot of pushback too from like, the Mexican president was like, okay, well, we're going to put,
Yeah,
25% tariff on you,
right. Exactly.
and it's like, okay. I mean, it hurts the transportation industry for sure.
Big time. No, I agree.
If you think your avocados are expensive now,
Yup.
like what, and I know he eats a lot of guacamole,
As he should.
you know, so good luck, man. I don't know.
Exactly.
I hate saying that. That's been a lot of people have been saying that, like, yeah, you voted for this. And it's like, well, it's enough of it's enough of a like enough people to be like, it's half of us.
Yeah,
So
it'll affect everybody. Yeah, I agree.
well, it's gonna affect everybody, but like the attitude of like putting the onus on the people who voted for Trump. This is, I think, the thing getting back to like cutting your family off. Well,
Yeah,
that's real easy if
yeah,
you hate them already or you don't get along with them. But like, it's not the answer. It's not the answer because like we're all going to be affected by this, and like you're just going to go live in a cave until Trump dies, and then come out and be like, "Told you." Like everything's cool now. I'm back into society, and like, no, dude. Like, I don't know, man. I think you have to stay engaged. Is what I'm saying.
I agree. I think you're right. I think you have to stay engaged regardless of who. One is that you've got to continue to understand what's happening and how things are affected to the best as you can. The best, I mean, and that's the other thing is admitting, because here's part of the issue too, is admitting you don't understand it all. It's like the thing that really frustrates me is when people are like, "Hey, man, just do your research. I've researched this." I'm like, "Have you? Like, come on, stop." Like,
Are you still researching the COVID vaccine?
exactly. So part of that is admitting ourselves when we say, "Well, you just got to read some more and you got to do some understanding." Like our understanding of the issues are also limited. And so there's a bit of just kind of raising your hand and going, "Look, I don't get it all either, but to the degree that I can, I'm trying." Whilst also being open to hearing other people's perspective.
Yeah. I think that we're not open to other people's perspectives, though.
By and large, we're not, but we
Yeah.
should be.
I think part of this too is like the way we consume information is very biased. Like nobody's like, if you see a story on your feed, scrolls through and there's all these stories and you see a story, a headline that grabs you and maybe you read the article, maybe you don't. We've come to the conclusion that you're probably not reading the article. Is that, what is this news source? What is their
Yes,
bias? What is
exactly.
their, it's an easy thing to do to be like, okay, Washington Post, what's their media bias?
Yeah,
Like go to
yeah,
that. How accurate are they day to day on their facts?
yeah,
Like are
yeah.
they, like it's easy to do that and
Mhm.
find out what the bottom line is
Yeah,
and
yeah.
not be swayed by some algorithm.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think it is reasonable to expect people to be able to read something like that and go, okay, I can kind of pick out where they're coming from if they are trying to slant it. Like it tends to be pretty obvious. So when you're able to do that, and then you see it, to go, okay, well, how do I balance that and see it from maybe a different perspective? And then even try to go to a third source and go, okay, well, here's one that tends to be more balanced. Are there consistencies or inconsistencies and how all these sort of things come together? But again, that just takes time, and it takes a attention span that most people don't have.
But I do think you keep seeing this thing, and I believe it is that we live in a post-factual world where facts don't really mean anything to anybody anymore. Like I was listening to this one podcast. It's by a guy that did a podcast called S Town, and it was about like him doing this story. He got contacted by this guy who lives in Alabama who wanted him to investigate these murders that have gone unsolved. So, it tickles the guy's fancy enough to go down there, and he starts talking to this guy, and the story becomes more about this guy who had contacted him because he's like a interesting character. He's like this gay man who lives in Alabama who's very, obviously liberal, and like it becomes more about him, right? And then the guy dies, commits suicide halfway through the guy doing the story. And then he starts telling the guy's story after he dies, and like he got a lot of backlash from the journalism world of like, hey man, like this is kind of weird that you're still telling his story when he didn't give you permission to after he died, so like he's examining like his decisions in making this podcast and like how journalism has changed. And he does this one little bit where he talks to this guy who wrote for the Atlantic and who basically predicted, he wrote this article in like August of 2019 and sort of predicted the insurrection. And this guy since then has quit being a journalist because he believes that facts don't matter anymore. He goes, you get into journalism and like the thing that you're looking for is the truth. And he's like, that's not the case anymore in journalism. And like, I kind of believe that. Like, it's like we live in this world where like facts don't care. It's like me saying about like an administration bettering your life doesn't make you vote for that kind of thing. Like if you got a job because Biden opened a plant in Ohio and you voted for Trump, what he did for you doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like we live in this twisted world of like facts don't matter, your well-being doesn't matter. It's just everything that you see online matters.
Yeah. Yeah. It's your version of the facts.
Yeah.
It's your version of the truth is what matters. And so you'll adapt everything else that might factor into that to come in line with it. So yeah.
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 Yeah, cuz you can Google anything. If you have this notion in your head of what something is, you can Google anything to back that up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can
And
go to,
find
if you think you have cancer, go to WebMD. They'll tell you have
yeah.
cancer,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
So I do think that, you know, this is where our lives are now is the internet dictates all of it.
Yeah. Social media has a huge influence on it. Yeah, it's the way it's how we get our information. That's what dictates it. All the information now is curated, and yeah, it's just siphoned in a way that life becomes a bit of an echo chamber. And so
I'll,
once you kind of make a choice, then everything reinforces it.
and also, information isn't as precious because it's there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like, used to you would like crave for information, to be for your mind to kind of like expand and be fed. And now it's like you don't have to work for it, and it's just there, and it's just another. It's like it's almost like breathing. But at some point, it's like any other technology. The bubble could burst on it. The cloud
Mhm.
could go away.
No, I
You know,
agree. Yeah, absolutely.
not that I got accused of like right after the election of like kind of doomsday prepping. But I wasn't like stockpiling guns or like canned food, I was just like thinking to myself because I had this like existential crisis of like I have this brought I was partnered in bringing this life into this world, and I was like, and I was thinking hard, like, what is his world going to look like in 20 years?
Hmm.
You know, like say that the worst things happen with Trump getting in office. Say he does weird things and like there isn't another election for 20 years. You know, what's his life going to look like? He's going to have to know some things, right? He's going to have to like I'm going to have to teach him some things.
Hmm.
Things I don't know. I'm going to have to learn them first.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that is kind of a doomsday sort of post-apocalyptic mindset, but like it could happen, you know?
Could. I mean, yeah, there's no question it's possible. I think also though that regardless of what happens, that statement is still true. Like regardless of what happens, like there's no way as fast as technology moves, there's no way to be able to really prepare for what the next 20 years looks like. And so everyone is going to have to adapt and learn things that they've not learned before in order to then guide their children in those things as well. It's just the nature of life and the reality of it, of just how that kind of works. And so I don't know if it's doomsday as much as it is just saying, okay, like let's not stick our head in a hole and just prepare. Like things are going to change for better or for worse, probably both. Let's stay engaged so we kind of know how to navigate that.
I mean, and the one thing I think about the most is just like physically what the earth is going to look like and be like because like climate change is real, and then now, you have a person that Trump is obviously a climate change denier and like it's going to go in and repeal things and make things worse because he already did in the 4 years he was in office. But like, you see all these we all are aware we're all affected by weather, and the weather has changed, the climate
Yeah.
has changed, like places are being wiped off the map, and it's just going to keep happening, so like physically the land is going to be different, you know
Yeah. No, you're right. Absolutely will. Yeah. And the access to it will be different as well. Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, that's notes from Magaland.
I think that one of the things we should get into down the road, because I just think it would be interesting to one, challenge ourselves, but then also just to kind of clarify um, is terminology. So, like a couple times you've used the idea of wokeism and the idea of MAGAism or MAGA land or whatever. And to be able to go, okay, what is it that we mean? And if it's different from what is it that we think other people mean when they use those words? You know what I mean? Because they have become these huge sort of tents that people congregate under. And I'm not sure we're all using the same meaning for the words that we're saying, because for some people it is a complete, either one of those words can be just a complete non-starter, or the opposite, it is a complete engager, and everything comes in full blast. So it'd be interesting, I think, just to kind of talk through that even from our own perspectives and go, okay, how do you define that? What do you think other people mean when they use those words as well?
We
So that
should
could be
do
another
that.
episode.
We should do two more. We should do one on the woke mind virus, and we should do one on the MAGA mind virus.
Yeah, no, I think that could be
Not
really
that I
good.
think that their mind virus is for real, but I think we could like break down the far left and break down the far right
Yeah.
for
Well,
sure.
and I think what happens, I think it would be fair to say that both of those are big enough in their influence that you could say they are mind viruses. In other words, they affect a lot of people, and I think sometimes they affect people in ways that they don't fully understand how they're being affected by it.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
negative connotation, but there maybe it's just the woke philosophy and the MAGA philosophy is kind of a better way to talk.
yeah, I mean it's definitely radicalized certain sections of the population
Yeah,
for
definitely.
sure. And like, some of these things are, I don't know. I feel like one is more, for me personally, is more tilted in making sense and one isn't.
Yeah, sure,
But
sure.
anyway, we could talk about it.
Yeah, I think
But
that'd be
anyway,
good.
yeah. So this is our latest MBD. My brother's deeper. Are you good with the MBD?
Yeah, that's fine. I think anytime you use something like that, you probably have to every now and then just remind people what it stands for.
Yeah, it stands for My Brother Deeper, but we're like, we're entering into this new phase,
Yeah.
and I feel like we need to rebrand.
Okay. I'm cool with that.
Yeah, so,
MBD.
MBD, and I guess we'll see you guys next time.
Sweet.